Hello and welcome to the latest in the Deckhive Introduces webinar series, where we meet the creators of the card decks, the fabulous card decks that are in the Deckhive library. And so today we're really pleased to be joined by Jolene Hill, who is joining us from Australia, which is why it's a little bit dark where you are at the moment, isn't it, Jolene?
Yes, it is. Yes, I'm sorry. It looks a little bit like I'm in a dungeon, but it's a little bit hard to light the room up. So yes.
We appreciate you joining us after a busy and full-on day. So thank you for making time to do this. We would like to get to know you a little bit, and we'll get to know your card deck, or one of your card decks, yes. And how that can be used in the Deckhive system, or even in person for those people who have the printed hard copy version of your deck. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Really pleased to have you here, and it's great to have your deck on the platform, because it's something quite different, I think, to the other decks we have. So, but do you want to give us a bit of a potted history about yourself and how you kind of ended up where you did with a deck of cards?
Yes, well, thank you first of all for asking me to join tonight. My story, that the way the card deck came about was two-pronged. One is my professional career, which was as a funeral director. And secondly, my personal life. My husband passed away from cancer 12 years ago. So when I was a funeral director, I no longer am, but I saw hundreds of families, and I came to realize that when I sat down to talk to families and I would ask them questions about their loved one who'd passed away, and I'd ask them little questions about their life. And it was interesting that I'd often have adult children, and I'd ask a simple question like, what was your dad's first job? And I'd get 3 different answers from 3 of the children, because they all had a different idea about their dad's first job, and they'd be really surprised that their siblings knew about other jobs. And I came to realize that we don't talk a lot about our life story. And it's something that we do need to do. And I found this when my husband was, he had cancer and he was unwell. And one of the ways that we, by accident, found that we could cheer him up, he was very depressed, was if we have 5 sons. If we sat down and we asked him to tell us stories from when he was a teenager and his childhood stories. And I'd known my husband for 38 years, and to my surprise, I found out so much I didn't know about him. So that was basically, those 2 things were the catalyst for me getting interested in encouraging people to talk about their life story.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff, isn't it? And I guess that's quite a privileged position to be in, isn't it, when you're in contact with families at that moment, because
absolutely,
it's a sort of very vulnerable time for people.
It is, and it's when people like to start reflecting on somebody's life. That's when they like to start talking. And I started to think, what an awful shame if they don't know all the stories from that person's life.
Yeah, and I guess these are the kind of things that are difficult to ask about in some ways. If you know the end is coming, then you have a kind of
reluctance.
Yeah, kind of like, it's kind of a bit almost obvious, isn't it? It's kind of like it's awkward to ask the questions, even though you might be curious and think, well, I might not have much of a chance to kind of learn these things about you. But then, is it appropriate, and how do I ask the question? Because if I might kind of stumble on my words, or it might just feel awkward.
And that's why it often doesn't happen. And it's also why I became so passionate about encouraging people to have these conversations long before that situation arises, to have them in a happy setting, not in a setting where you feel reluctant to start asking those questions about someone's life story.
So I can see the link to the deck of cards. So how did you come about that idea of putting some of these questions into cards and creating your life story as a deck? And was there a moment where you thought, I know how I'm going to do this?
I looked at the resources that were out there. I thought, and there are many resources out there to encourage people to either talk or record or write down their life story. so I thought, well, why don't people use these resources? And when I started asking questions, and I was very focused to begin with on the aged care sector. So when I asked people that volunteer or staff, they said they had the resources for this, but they're often quite bulky and hard to navigate, and in some ways off-putting for their clients. And so it all becomes too hard. And I came to realize what was needed was something that was more of a buy-in to get people to want to do it, to really just kickstart the conversations. People can go on from our cards and write their life story. They can write it like War and Peace if they wish, but the idea is to get them started. And that's the difficult part, is getting people started to have these conversations. And I thought about it and I thought, well, cards are something that most people are familiar with. They're tactile, they're engaging, they're non-threatening. It's not like somebody sitting down with a clipboard and a pen and a big list of questions in front of you. They can just have one card. And in some ways, they work as a permission to speak. So, at meetings, sometimes you're given a talking stick so that you have permission to speak at that point, and people will listen. And the cards sometimes in a group often feel like it's giving someone permission to speak and tell a story about the question on that card.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can imagine having repeated opportunities to play and to kind of take one card. I can imagine visiting elderly relatives and just having one card each time we went, or 2 or 3 cards, so it's not too daunting, but at the same time, as you say, get them started, get some sharing going. And it's positive on both sides, isn't it? Because we're learning about them, but also they're reminiscing about interesting.
It's a two-way street. Exactly. It's not just about the person who might be wanting to write their life story or record it. The person or the group can also talk about their responses to that, or their reflections on that question.
So do you go through various iterations of the deck when you first created it and printed it, or was it straightforward and quickly done?
It was very difficult to get it down to 50 questions. We could have made it 150, but obviously that would then become daunting. So we just wanted to be 50. And we tried to create the questions so that some of the questions are straightforward about life events, but we wanted most of them to be questions where people needed to reflect on their life, and that would lead to stories. Because what happens is, once people start reflecting and they tell a story, that story will lead to another story. And often they completely forget what the question was initially, because they've gone 3 stories down the track by now. And they're surprised. They're often really surprised how much they start to remember from, the events in their lives. So we tried to make it a mix of questions. I think we went out with about 90, and we had help from people, I will say, in the industry, in the aged care industry, and they helped us get it down to 50.
Okay. And you've got a copy there, haven't you, of your printed deck?
Yes, I have. Do I just hold it up there? Yeah. So comes in a little case, and the cards we tried to make as attractive as possible. In actual fact, these card images are all my family and friends. So
okay.
It was very, very much, we decided the best way was to get everybody involved. So this was all of us using the cards in a real session. So it was a lot of fun doing the images for them.
Excellent. So how long ago was that then you created the printed version and did your first print run?
It was around about 2.5 years ago. We had the first one, so it's still quite early days. It was.
And what's been your experience of having them out in the world and people using them, and what stories have you heard? Have you had feedback from users?
Look, I was very focused on the aged care sector, but the cards just grew a life of their own, and people started using them in ways that we had never imagined. So from companies buying them for their management meetings, where they have cross-management teams as icebreakers at the beginning of a meeting. We had, obviously we have counselors, social workers, a lot of pastoral work in churches. We've had colleges, secondary colleges buy them for their students aged 15, 16, 17, where those students go out into aged care and retirement villages on a buddy system once a month, which is a wonderful idea, but a lot of 16, 17-year-olds don't know how to start up a conversation with somebody in aged care. And they take, like you suggested before, Martin, they take 1 or 2 cards and easy conversation, and the teenager can talk about themselves, which the aged care people love, and they talk about their reflections on that question. So they have really been used in so many ways that we didn't think of. So
yeah, that's really fantastic, isn't it, to hear. That's one of the, that's great card. I think the simplicity of them as a tool means that they can be used in creative ways, and people find ways to make them fit with the work they do or the audience that they work with, and that takes it to a whole other level, doesn't it? I think that's really one of the joys of being a creator of a card deck.
It is, and that was what we were looking for, something that was so simple to use that it would engage somebody, and it wouldn't be off-putting for them. It can lead to all sorts. People have gone on to write entire booklets about their life story, but there's many other uses other than that.
So do you have any other examples then you can share about how they've been used and the impact that they've had?
I have lots. I have I often tell the story about the power of the cards. I went out to talk to I'll start again. I went out to talk to a support group, a cancer support group, who had been meeting for around about 15 years. And I talk a little bit, and then I usually give out cards to a few of the people. There was about 30 people there at the meeting. And we have some fun. They read their question and they reflect and tell us something from their life story. I had a lady sitting next to me who was extremely quiet. And to my surprise, when I went to give out the cards, she asked for one. And she wanted to go first, and she read out her card. And the question was, tell me 3 words that best describe you. And when she read the question, the facilitator of the group said, "Oh, Betty, it would be quiet," because apparently Betty was a very quiet lady. She didn't normally talk. She had been coming for 14 years. And she said, "Well, my first word would be survivor." And I'm thinking, well, that makes sense because we're at a cancer support group and she's a cancer survivor. But no, she talked for 20 minutes about the fact that she had been in a violent marriage relationship for 50 years, and she had left 5 years earlier. And she talked about that for 20 minutes. Now, I looked around the group as this was happening, and literally their mouths had dropped open. And the facilitator told me the next day that Betty rarely spoke at the meeting. So she said that she told the facilitator it was like a giant weight being lifted off her, being able to talk about that. So that's kind of along the lines of the permission to speak about something that you find difficult to talk to people about. So
that's huge, isn't it? And that's just, like you can't get better than that to give someone a voice.
Absolutely.
Who maybe, otherwise just wouldn't put themselves center stage, wouldn't prioritize their own story above others. In that kind of context, it kind of gives them a chance to have their moment to share.
That's right. It was her moment to, have permission to speak about that. So the other example I was going to mention was the cards are in different languages. So we have them in Polish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Spanish, and we'll have Italian shortly. They've just been translated into Italian. We're doing them one at a time. The Polish Council, Community Council here in Australia are using our cards with their volunteers who go out to their seniors in the Polish community here. And they think they're a wonderful resource, and they told us it's very rare that they can have resources in their native language. So they have a lot of resources, but being that they're going to the seniors in their community, this just helps them to get them talking because the cards are in their native language. So we will be working hard to translate them into as many languages as we can, and hopefully get them up on Deckhive as well.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, so we do have a number of cards in different languages, or decks of cards in different languages already. But yeah, we found the same as you, that very often there's a lack of resources in native language, which is a real shame, and in today's world is kind of not necessary. And I think the digital version of cards makes that even easier to do, because one of the challenges with doing something like that is always, are you going to be able to justify a print run of however many in that local language, isn't it? And
Exactly.
it's great that you're finding a way to do that. It's always been something that we've been wary of with our own decks of cards, because you don't want 500 decks of Vietnamese language cards that you have no way of knowing if anyone's ever going to buy them from you.
Well, interestingly, I gave a talk in Melbourne to the Chinese Vietnamese Association. My other deck of cards is talking about your future aging plans, but they didn't want me to speak about that. They just wanted me to talk about the Your Life Story cards. But interestingly, the questions that I kept getting from them was they wanted to talk about the future planning cards, because there's so few resources in Vietnamese and Chinese for them to plan for their aged care, etc. here in Australia. So they are very welcome resources in native language for them.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's great that you're making them so widely available. Okay, well, so should we have a look at the cards so that we can kind of get a bit of a better feel for what they look like and feel like? So let me share my screen so you can see the Deckhive session. So we have various different tables set out already. If I go to the first table, then we've just got a selection of a few different cards here. So do you want to talk us through kind of what we're looking at? We've just got 8 of the cards on the table here.
Yes. So as I mentioned before, some of the cards are fairly direct questions about life events. And, sometimes the answers to those questions can be shorter. Most of these cards require quite a bit of reflection. So people really need to give some thought to these cards. And these cards, and there's a lot more than just these ones, a lot of them will lead to storytelling. And that's what we aim for, is to get people starting to tell stories, particularly things like family holidays, fondest memories of your siblings and grandparents. We hope people have fond memories of that, but if not, it can sometimes be a good thing if they're going to talk about past issues that they might not have resolved, which is a whole new avenue of thought about the cards. They can lead to people dealing with past issues that they haven't dealt with before. So, but yes, best loved pets, all of these things lead to stories. In fact, if I'm doing this in a community group, it's sometimes hard to control, because everybody starts putting their hands up, because everybody wants to tell you stories that relate to these type of cards. So, I mean, let's face it, we all innately like to talk about ourselves. And if we're given the opportunity to, it doesn't take a lot of encouragement to get people talking. So once they get the idea, it's hard to stop them. So particularly if they have stories they want to talk about. And things like, what is the best thing about your life right now? That can open up a whole Pandora's box of things that somebody's family, or if they're in aged care, their carers need to know. So those are very leading questions, hopefully, to get them to open up about something that's happening in their life right now.
Yeah, and it's lovely to have those kind of more hopeful kind of questions as well in there. I think that's important.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
when you're using them with a group, do you find then that you actually don't need many cards for the conversation? Do you find that one card and then lots of people will contribute their response to the same card rather than everybody having different cards? What's kind of is there a sort of favorite process you have when you're using them in a group situation?
Look, I normally, in a group, I normally pick a one card myself, which is a card about how were you named after anybody, or do you have a nickname? And I have a funny story about my name, so I tell that just to get people to relax, because they do get a little bit nervous about they're going to be put on the spot in front of a group and have to talk. So I try to show them that this is it's a fun process. It's, and I always explain at the beginning, if you have a card that you don't wish to answer, by all means don't, just put the card away. But once, yes, it takes one or two, but once they get the idea that this is non-threatening, everybody wants to get their story out there.
Now, I'm curious now
Sorry?
Well, I'm curious now about what your name story is. Does it involve Dolly Parton?
No, it doesn't. It was before Dolly Parton. I'm a little bit older than that, but no. I'm the youngest of four girls, and so my dad might have been a little bit disappointed he had another girl. I think he would have liked a boy, so my mum said he could pick my name, and he came back and the next day and said he'd picked out Jolene, which was very uncommon here in Australia at that time, and she had already picked out a good name for me, Mary Margaret, and she said, I don't really like it. I never heard it. Where did you get it from? And he said it was this month's centerfold in American Playboy. So she said definitely not, but apparently he won. So I'm Jolene Margaret. So once I tell that, people relax. It's a true story. I haven't made it up. It's actually a true story, but people can see that there are, good stories that you can talk about. And my sons were pretty amazed when they heard that story, because they'd never heard it before, so they were pretty surprised about it. So
excellent. That's cool. Thank you. So I mean, maybe we can show some other examples within the Deckhive situation, yes, a system about how we might use them. So one way we could use the cards would be to select as the host of a session which cards we want to work with that day with our group. So we pull them out onto the table, and then people can choose from one of the options that's on the table. So there might be situations, I guess, where you want to narrow down the available options for various reasons. Do you do that in practice with the hard copy cards as well?
Yes, I think it's better just to give 2 or 3 options, not to give too many. It becomes quite confusing for people. 2 or 3 at a time is quite enough. You don't want just the one in case it is a question they really don't want to answer. So you need to have 2 or 3 options there.
Great. Okay. And you could also then have a variation of that where you put the cards face down on the table, and then you can turn them over, or ask people, I guess, to choose at random and turn one over, and then have the conversation about that.
Exactly. Yes. And that's a, if I can say fun, that's a fun way to do it. They can turn it over. I give them the option, if they don't want to answer that, they can, but that's a fun way to do it as well, without confusing them with too many questions.
And with the selection we've got here, was there a kind of, there are different types of questions slightly. You mentioned, I think, when we were chatting before, about how some of the top ones are kind of a more factual based or less storytelling in their nature.
Yeah, that's right. Some of them are like, for instance, what is your first job? It's just a factual question. Not to say that people don't often tell a very long story about their first job, because there's some story attached to that, or that first job might have led on to something else. But sometimes it can just be a straightforward answer to those questions. So you don't want to have too many of those. You want some of the other ones that are more reflective and they need to think about. And normally they would have to tell a story that answers that question.
Yeah, so it's maybe a nice sort of more gentle way in for those people who are a bit reticent to say much. If they feel like they can give a short answer, that's a good way in, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then if we go to a blank table here, so while I'm showing the tables, I'm just clicking these orange numbers or the white numbers at the bottom, and you can see that we're moving through. So when we are working in group situations in Deckhive, then this can be a really useful functionality, because it allows us to, for example, have different groups of people in different spaces. So if we were doing this in a training session, then often we'll say, if you're in breakout room 3 on Zoom, then you'll use table 3 in Deckhive. So it gives people a bit of space to choose their cards and lay them out and make a bit of a mess without that kind of all getting cluttered with too many people in the same space. So that's kind of a really useful feature to have. And if we click on the deck on the left-hand side here on this blank table, then you can see the whole deck, and you can see that we can scroll through all of the cards. And if we find one that we particularly want to choose, then we can just drag that across. So another way we could use this would be to ask people to open the entire deck, I guess, and they could scroll through and pick a question that speaks to them, or that they find interesting, or they'd like to share their story about. So we give them the choice also about which question to choose from the whole deck. But obviously that might take a bit longer to do, but even more freedom.
That's often a good way to get people speaking, because if they can find something that they really want to tell a story about, it's a good way to break the ice and get them talking, because it's something they feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, I can see that. So, but we could also flip all of the cards. So top left here with the icon to flip all, and then scroll through and then just drag a random card across, because of course then that could be anything with this number of cards. Then unless you know them inside out, you're not going to know which one you're going to get.
No.
But it was also, you wanted to mention the cards that you have at the end of the deck as well, didn't you?
That's right. We had 2 cards at the end of the deck there, which basically give people the option of asking their own question. We felt that was important because whilst we had really 48 questions there might be a burning question, and particularly if it's a family situation, there might be a burning question that somebody wants to ask that's not covered by the questions we have in the deck. So we thought it was important to put 2 wild cards in there to give people the opportunity. Having said that, once this conversation starts, people can go on forever and ever with their questions. Ours are basically, like I keep saying, they're there to kickstart it. People will come up with their own questions along the way, but this is to encourage them to come up with their own questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And then if people are wanting to answer the questions and maybe capture some reflections within the system as they're doing that, then of course they can just drag a sticky note onto the table, double click on that, and then they can type in there whatever is useful. So that could be the additional question that they want to ask. They create a sticky note with that question on it. It could be some notes about the responses that they're hearing from their relative or colleague or whoever it might be that they're in discussion with. They can color coordinate these in some way if they wanted to as well, if that's helpful. And of course the session is then saved within Deckhive, so we can come back to it and continue the same session at a later date if that's helpful to do that. And also we can click on the camera icon to take a screenshot of all of the cards and sticky notes on that particular table. So that's a really easy way for people to be able to take away a bit of a memory jogger of the conversation that they've had, which I think could be valuable in many situations too. So is there anything else that you'd want to kind of say about practical applications? Any other examples you could share or ideas about things that might give people a chance to kind of get creative and have a play with the deck?
Look, really, other people are better than me at coming up with these. A lot of people look at them and depending on, where they're sitting, whether they're working in aged care or, a lot of them are being, the other area they're being used a lot is palliative care. And as you mentioned, it's a difficult time to start asking people about their life story, but the feedback that we have had, and we've had a lot of feedback from palliative care, that the cards do make it a lot easier to start asking people to talk about their life story in a difficult time. So apart from that, it's really the sort of work that you're doing. The other application that we've had just recently is people working in prison counselling have been using the cards to get people talking about their life story, and that leads to a whole lot of issues that need resolving. But they say the cards help to break the ice when they're talking with their clients there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, we should also mention that there are some supporting resources that you've created as well, aren't there, for people who are wanting to use the deck or have presentations based around the deck. So I know we're going to be adding some of those to the Deckhive system shortly, so people can access them through that route. But do you want to say anything about what those resources are?
We had a lot of requests from aged care homes and retirement homes as to how to use the cards. And so we designed a training guide for the do's and don'ts of how to train staff or volunteers to sit down with clients in those settings and use the cards over a period of weeks to make it an enjoyable activity based. And so we designed a training guide and a PowerPoint presentation, which people can access from us. We also, after a lot of requests, we designed an app. We resisted at first because we felt that the whole thing was having a conversation, was, one-on-one or in a group, but it was all face-to-face. But we came to realize that we do live in an instant society now, and some people prefer rather than waiting for the cards, they want it straight away. So we decided designing an app couldn't be too difficult. We were wrong. It's been a wee journey, but it's now been released. So it's basically our cards, but they're in an app format. People can either key in their responses to the questions and save them on their device, or they can talk and it turns it into text on their device. And we've just added the option where they can then purchase an e-booklet back from us with all of the responses in an e-booklet. So yes, they're the resources that we have available at the moment. Cool.
That sounds great. So thank you. Well, let me just close this session on here, and then for those who don't know already, who may be watching the recording or joining us live, just to show briefly that we have a whole library of different decks available within the Deckhive system. So if you scroll down the library far enough, then you come to your life story deck here. And if you were looking for things in different languages, then you'll see at the top here the different filter for language, so you can choose the appropriate language there. And then find the decks that are available in that language that way. So feel free to explore and have a play around. We do have a free 30-day trial with no obligation to continue. So if you haven't tried Deckhive already, then that's a really great way to get started and have a play around, explore the decks in the library. And importantly, to try using that interactive facility so that you can bring people in to join you in a real-time session, so that all of you in the session can choose cards, move them around, flip them over, and so on, just as I've been doing in the session today. So that's how Deckhive's been created, to give you that interactive space to facilitate those conversations. So hopefully that's a useful tool for many of you. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch, or in fact, take a look at the bottom of the website, and you'll see there are some tutorials there, so that can help you if you get stuck with anything, or give you some ideas of things that you might be able to do. So if there are any questions that are coming up from those of you that are here, then feel free to add them into chat. I can see there's one already around buying hard copies of the deck. So are they available in the UK or other parts of the world, or are they only in Australia? What's the story with
No,
getting people's hands on them?
Yes, you can purchase them from us. We send them all over the world. So now we've got past the slow mail with COVID. They're arriving fairly quickly. So you can certainly purchase them. We'll send them to you.
Excellent. So where will people find you and your website?
Oh, the website is called yourlifetalks.com, and there's an online shop on there.
Excellent. That's nice and easy.
Yes.
Thank you. So yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to share that we haven't covered already? Anything I've forgotten to ask you?
No, the only thing I wanted to add, which I think is really important, is that there's been a number of studies done worldwide. The most recent one was Monash University here in Australia on the health benefits of autobiographical storytelling. And if you have a look at, it's quite amazing what their research has shown in health benefits for people talking about their life story. Right, reducing stress, lifting self-esteem, finding resolution, better understanding of their life, just a lot of benefits, amazing amount of health benefits. So it's worth, if you're interested in looking at that and you're looking at it for your clients, it's not just about having a conversation and interesting stories. There's a lot of health benefits attached to it as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a brilliant note to end on. Thank you. Excellent. Well, thanks ever so much again for joining us. It's really fantastic to hear your story and to see the deck a bit more closely and to hear some examples of how it can be used. I'm sure it's going to be really valuable to a huge number of people around the world. So thank you for everything that you're doing to make it become a reality. And thanks for joining us. And those of you who've found this session valuable, I hope you'll be able to join us for future sessions, or in fact past sessions. So the other Deckhive Introduces sessions that we've run in the months gone by are available on our YouTube channel. So we'll circulate the recording of this session in the next day or so. And then please do go and dig out other sessions for all decks that you might find useful and interesting. So thanks, Jolene. Well, thanks, especially after a busy and long day that you've had there. I appreciate you
thank you for listening, and I hope you all get to have your breakfast if you haven't had it already. I know Coach Taff has probably had their breakfast by now, but I'll be having dinner shortly. So thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Jolene. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.